The city buzzed around Dwayne Johnson as he stepped out of his car. After a grueling day on set, he finally found a moment of peace. He'd been in the business long enough to know that even a few hours of quiet could feel like a luxury. He had heard about this new upscale restaurant in town, so he decided to check it out. The moment he entered, he could feel the eyes of everyone around him. Hollywood fame followed him wherever he went. Tonight, he wasn't in the mood for attention. He simply wanted a meal in peace, far from the flashing cameras and noisy crowds. He wasn't here to impress anyone. He just wanted to enjoy the evening. A hostess greeted him at the door. "Good evening, sir. Do you have a reservation?" "No, but I don't mind sitting anywhere," Dwayne replied with a warm smile. She led him to a table in the back of the restaurant, and as he settled in, the servers went about their duties, gliding through the room with practiced efficiency. A young waiter approached his table, a menu in hand. "Good evening, sir. Can I help you with the menu?" the waiter asked. Dwayne glanced up at him and nodded. "Sure, I'd love some recommendations. Something light." The waiter hesitated, his eyes scanning Dwayne's casual attire. He didn't seem to like what he saw. Dwayne wore a simple black t-shirt and jeans, nothing overly fancy. The waiter's demeanor shifted, his tone colder. "I'm afraid, sir, that this is a fine dining establishment. It's usually better to wear something a little more appropriate for the setting. If you're looking for a casual meal, perhaps another place would be more fitting," the waiter said, not even trying to hide his judgment. Dwayne was momentarily taken aback. He had been to countless high-end restaurants in his life. Never had he been treated this way, but he didn't let it show. Instead, he smiled again, trying to keep things light. "I'm just here for a quiet dinner. No need for anything fancy tonight," he said. The waiter didn't respond, just handed him the menu with a slight roll of his eyes, as if Dwayne was some regular person who didn't belong. Dwayne took the menu, his patience slowly wearing thin. The waiter, still oblivious to who he was, made no attempt to offer any further assistance. Dwayne glanced over the menu, considering his options, but he could already sense that this evening wouldn't be as relaxing as he'd hoped. Despite the subtle insult, he was determined not to let it ruin his night. The last thing he wanted was to make a scene. The waiter returned a few minutes later, still with that air of superiority. "Are you ready to order?" Dwayne placed his order calmly, asking for a light wine and a seafood appetizer. He could feel the tension between them, though it was clear the waiter had no idea who he was. As Dwayne sat back, he couldn't help but wonder how long it would take for the waiter to figure it out. He knew this wasn't going to end quietly. Dwayne sat back in his chair, swirling the water in his glass as he watched the room around him. The restaurant was buzzing with energy, but he felt a growing discomfort. The waiter's dismissive attitude was grating on him more than he cared to admit. He wasn't used to being treated like this, especially not in a place like this. People often stared when he walked in, but they usually did so out of curiosity or admiration, not judgment. A few minutes later, the waiter returned to the table, still maintaining that same stiff, superior posture. He set the wine glass down in front of Dwayne without looking at him, muttering, "Here you go," and began to turn away before Dwayne could even respond. "Actually," Dwayne said, his voice even, "I think you've made a mistake. This isn't what I ordered. I specifically asked for seafood." The waiter glanced at the dish for a moment before shrugging nonchalantly. "It's close enough. You'll live." Dwayne's eyebrow twitched in surprise, but he kept his cool. "I don't think it's too much to ask for the right dish, do you?" The waiter, clearly not interested in accommodating him, glanced around impatiently. "If you're going to be picky about it, maybe this isn't the place for you. The kitchen's backed up, and we're trying to serve everyone here, not just one person." The comment hit Dwayne harder than he expected. He had been in plenty of high-end restaurants where things didn't go smoothly, but this was different. The waiter wasn't just making a mistake, he was dismissing him, treating him as though he didn't belong. Dwayne took a deep breath, resisting the urge to raise his voice. "I'd still appreciate it if you could fix it," he said calmly, though there was a trace of steel in his voice. The waiter sighed dramatically. "Fine," he muttered, rolling his eyes before walking off again, his movements sharp and annoyed. Dwayne watched him go, his patience starting to wear thin. He wasn't sure if it was the way the waiter spoke to him or the fact that he hadn't even been acknowledged as a customer, alone the fact that he was one of the most famous people in the world right now. Either way, it didn't sit right with him. He could feel the eyes of the people around him, a mix of curiosity and discomfort, but no one dared to approach. The tension in the air was palpable. Dwayne wasn't sure if the waiter would figure out who he was anytime soon, but that didn't really matter to him at the moment. The last thing he wanted was to cause a scene, but part of him wondered just how much more of this he could take. So, Dwayne sat back, took another slow sip of his water, and waited. He took another sip of his wine, trying to focus on the surroundings, but his thoughts kept drifting back to the way he'd been treated. Food, though perfectly prepared, had lost its appeal. It was clear the waiter had no interest in providing anything beyond the bare minimum. The more Dwayne thought about it, the more his frustration grew. Minutes passed before the waiter returned, carrying the corrected dish. He placed it down without making eye contact, his body language still stiff and uninterested. Dwayne glanced at the plate. It was exactly what he had ordered. Finally, the waiter had done his job, but the lack of acknowledgement stung. Dwayne took a small bite of the seafood, trying to find comfort in the taste. But it wasn't just the food, it was the experience that left him unsettled. This wasn't about the dish or the mistake. It was about how the waiter had treated him like an invisible customer. The waiter walked away, chatting with another colleague, his laughter echoing through the restaurant. Dwayne could see the waiter's posture, his chest puffed out as he gestured dramatically. He looked so pleased with himself, completely unaware of the tension he had left in his wake. And that's when it hit him. He still didn't know who Dwayne was. The waiter had dismissed him because, to him, Dwayne was just another ordinary diner. Dwayne, though taken aback by the realization, refused to let it slide. It wasn't about his fame. It was about respect. He decided to make his presence known. As the waiter passed by again, Dwayne caught his eye. This time the waiter froze, recognizing the man sitting in front of him. His face drained of color, and the realization hit hard. "Mr. Johnson," the waiter stammered, his confidence evaporating. Dwayne remained calm. "Now you know." The waiter quickly apologized, his voice shaky. I didn't realize. "So sorry, sir." Dwayne nodded slowly, his tone steady but firm. "It's not about who I am. It's about how you treat people. Respect goes a long way, whether the person is famous or not." The waiter, visibly embarrassed, nodded profusely. "I understand. I'm truly sorry." Dwayne offered a small smile. "I'm not looking for an apology, but I hope you remember this next time." The waiter nodded again and hurried away, clearly feeling the weight of the moment. Dwayne watched him go, a quiet satisfaction settling in. It wasn't about making a scene. It was about the lesson. As Dwayne finished his meal, he couldn't help but wonder if the waiter would take this experience to heart. The restaurant felt quieter now. There was still a lingering tension in the air, but it was no longer directed at him. He had made his point, and that was enough. Dwayne finished his meal in silence, the quiet hum of the restaurant around him now seeming almost peaceful. The earlier tension had dissipated, leaving a sense of resolution in its place. He glanced around the room, noting the soft murmurs of conversations and the clinking of silverware. The discomfort he had felt earlier was now gone. As he set down his fork, he couldn't help but think about the waiter. It was clear that the young man had been embarrassed by his mistake, and the apology, though rushed, had seemed genuine. Dwayne had seen his fair share of apologies in his life, some sincere, others not so much. But this one had felt different. The waiter wasn't just apologizing out of obligation. He was processing something, realizing that his actions had consequences. It wasn't lost on Dwayne that people often didn't see him as just a person. Celebrities, especially ones as public as him, could easily become symbols or caricatures in the eyes of others. But that didn't mean he was immune to being treated poorly, nor did it mean he should tolerate disrespect. Dwayne's phone buzzed in his pocket, but he didn't check it immediately. He was in no rush to leave. The evening had unfolded in a way he hadn't expected, but the lessons it carried felt significant. In a way, this encounter had reminded him of why he worked so hard to stay grounded. No matter how many accolades or achievements he accumulated, he was still a person who deserved respect, just like anyone else. The waiter didn't return to his table, but Dwayne didn't mind. He had made his point. There was no need for more interaction, no need for further apologies. Dwayne had learned to pick his battles over the years, and this one, in the grand scheme of things, was small, but it had still been important. The restaurant's atmosphere had returned to its usual rhythm, but Dwayne felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that, for all the glitz and glamour of the world he lived in, moments like these were the ones that kept him grounded. It wasn't about fame. It wasn't about recognition. It was about integrity, respect, and the quiet moments of reflection that defined a person's character. As he stood to leave, the waiter briefly passed by. Their eyes met again, and this time, the young man's gaze was filled with a mix of gratitude and humility. Dwayne nodded, acknowledging the silent understanding between them. No more words were needed. With that, Dwayne left the restaurant, feeling a sense of calm settle over him as he stepped back into the night. He had come for a quiet meal, and although the evening hadn't gone as he had expected, it had been a reminder that even in the smallest of interactions, respect was everything. And sometimes, that lesson was the one that stayed with you the longest. As Dwayne stepped out of the restaurant into the crisp evening air, he felt a sense of quiet satisfaction. The city's skyline stretched out before him, the streetlights casting a soft glow on the pavement. It was the kind of night where everything seemed to slow down just a bit, where the chaos of the day faded into the background. He took a deep breath, letting the cool air fill his lungs, feeling the weight of the evening lift. It hadn't been a night filled with the usual excitement or the hustle of a business meeting. It had been something simpler, something more personal. A reminder that the way you treat people mattered, whether you were famous or not, whether you were recognized or not. Dwayne knew that the waiter would probably think about their encounter for a while. He could see it in the young man's eyes, the realization that he had treated someone with disrespect, only to later realize who they were. But it wasn't the fact that Dwayne was famous that made the difference. It was the lesson the waiter had learned about human decency. As he walked down the sidewalk, Dwayne's phone buzzed again. This time he pulled it out, checking the message from his manager. It was a reminder about an upcoming meeting, something he could easily put out of his mind for the moment. But the buzz from the phone was a reminder that the world kept spinning, that life didn't slow down just because of one small interaction. Yet, in that moment, Dwayne felt a bit more centered, as if he had just closed one chapter of his day and was ready to move on to the next. The evening wasn't a story he would tell to anyone, but it was a moment that had stayed with him, one he would carry forward with him, even if just in his own thoughts. The lesson wasn't about pride or ego, but about humility, respect, and recognizing the humanity in everyone, regardless of their background or status. It was the simple things that made a person who they were, not the fame or the recognition that came with it. And as he walked toward the car waiting for him, Dwayne smiled to himself. Tonight, in its own quiet way, had reminded him of what really mattered. The next day, Dwayne went about his routine like usual. Early morning workouts, a few meetings, and then checking in with his team. It was a busy day, but there was something different in the air. The encounter from the night before lingered in the back of his mind. It wasn't that it was a life-changing moment. There was something about it that had stayed with him. A quiet feeling of closure. He had been reminded of his core values, respect, humility, and how we treat others, no matter who they are. As the day wore on, he didn't think much more about it until later that afternoon, when his phone buzzed with an unexpected message. It was from the restaurant, an email from the manager, thanking him for his understanding the previous night. Dwayne paused for a moment, surprised. The email was short, polite, and professional, but there was something in the tone that caught his attention. The manager was not only thanking him for his patience, but also mentioned that the waiter had come to him afterward, visibly shaken and remorseful. The waiter, according to the manager, had taken the time to reflect on how he had treated Dwayne and how it had affected his view on respect and customer service. He had apologized to his colleagues and even promised to be more aware of how he treated all customers in the future. Dwayne couldn't help but smile at the thought. It was nice to know that the waiter had taken something positive away from the situation, that it wasn't just another embarrassing moment that would fade into the background. It seemed that the message had truly resonated, and that gave Dwayne a quiet sense of satisfaction. He quickly typed out a short reply to the manager, thanking him for the update and saying he hoped the waiter's reflection helped him grow. It wasn't much, but it felt like the right thing to do. As he finished his day, Dwayne couldn't help but think about how small interactions, ones that might seem insignificant at the time, could have such a big impact on people's lives. For the waiter, that night would likely be a turning point, and maybe, just maybe, that moment of realization would help him approach others with more respect in the future. Dwayne was grateful for the reminder that no matter where you were in life, staying grounded and treating others with kindness was always worth it. It was a simple truth, one he'd carry with him wherever he went. Life moved on for Dwayne after the restaurant incident, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted inside him. He found himself paying more attention to the small acts of kindness around him, noticing how people interacted with one another. His mind kept drifting back to the waiter and how, even in such a brief moment, he had learned something valuable. Dwayne noticed the waiter's improvement in the weeks that followed. The restaurant sent him updates, sharing how the young man had become more respectful and aware of his actions. Dwayne didn't need an apology anymore. The waiter's change spoke volumes. It was a reminder that even small moments of respect could spark real growth in people and in himself. Weeks later, Dwayne found himself back in the same area and decided to revisit the restaurant. The staff greeted him warmly, and the atmosphere felt different, more welcoming. The waiter who had served him that night approached his table, his demeanor much more respectful this time. "I just wanted to thank you again," the waiter said. "I've learned so much since then." Dwayne smiled. "It's not about being perfect. It's about getting better every day. The waiter nodded, visibly grateful. As Dwayne settled in to enjoy his meal, he realized that both of them had grown from that encounter. The lesson was simple. Treating others with respect and kindness mattered more than anything.